The Norway Chess Tournament 2025 featured top players like Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru Nakamura, and the world champion Gukesh. In this game, Gukesh faces super grandmaster from China, Wei Yi. Gukesh starts with the most popular move in chess, pawn to e4. After pawn to e5, knight to f3 and knight to f6, we have a Petrov defense, also known as the Russian defense. A solid choice often used when black wants to steer towards equality or draw. Gukesh captures the pawn on e5, black first plays pawn to d6, attacking the knight, and only then recaptures the pawn on e4. At this point, white has three main options: pawn to d3, pawn to d4, and knight to c3. Gukesh chooses knight to c3, the most aggressive line. After the exchange of knights on c3, Wei Yi develops his bishop, preparing to castle kingside. White typically castles long in this variation and follows with development of the dark square bishop. Wei Yi castles, and Gukesh prepares for a long castle. Black plays knight to d7, and white castles long. With opposite side castling, the battle is officially on. Wei Yi jumps his knight to c5, and Gukesh shifts his queen to c4 to escape the attack. Black continues harassing the white queen, prompting Gukesh to move it again, this time to f4. Wei Yi gains space in the center with pawn to d5. Gukesh places his knight in the center, and once again the queen is under pressure and must move. Black plays queen to d7, connecting the rooks. Development is complete. Bishop to g4 becomes a threat, so Gukesh plays pawn to h3 as a preventive measure. After pawn to c6, Gukesh begins activity on the king side with pawn to g4. Wei Yi counters immediately with pawn to f5. Gukesh advances his pawn, though the engine prefers knight takes pawn on e6. Black plays pawn to f4, and Gukesh has to move his bishop. Rook to e8 follows from black, and Wei Yi position now looks clearly better. Gukesh brings his rook to g1, Wei Yi repositions his light squared bishop into a more powerful diagonal. Gukesh eliminates that bishop with the knight right away, and after queen recaptures on f5, Gukesh strikes the center with pawn to c4. Wei Yi centralizes his knight. Gukesh responds by pinning the knight with bishop to d3, forcing black to move the queen from the x-ray. He pins the knight again shortly after. Wei Yi repositions his bishop. There is an exchange of pawns on d5. Gukesh plays rook to e2, preparing to double the rooks on the e-file. And now comes the key moment of the game. Knight takes pawn on d2. At first glance, it looks great. If rook captures the black queen, then black knight captures white queen and black gains a piece. But Gukesh is a world champion for a reason. He finds a brilliant response. Bishop takes pawn on h7, check. And now, if the king takes the bishop, white queen checks on h5, and after the king moves, Gukesh can safely take the black queen. A beautiful tactic. Wei Yi sees all this and plays king to h8 instead. Gukesh calmly captures the knight on d2. Again, if he had taken the queen immediately, he would lose his own queen in return. Wei Yi now takes the bishop on h7, but after all this, black ends up with an extra bishop and still losing position. Gukesh has to be precise though, and he is. Rook takes pawn on d5, double attacking the black queen and bishop. The only way to defend both is queen to c7, but that move loses on the spot to queen to h5 check and pawn to g6. And black has no good defense against queen to h7 checkmate. Wei Yi spots it and plays queen to e2. Gukesh responds with pawn to g6 check. This cages the black king on the 8th rank. Next comes queen to b3. If queens are exchanged, rook recaptures on e3 and the game leads to a drawish rook endgame. But Gukesh avoids this. There are discovery checks everywhere, and the bishop on c5 cannot survive anyway. Wei Yi gives it up with bishop to e3 check. But Gukesh doesn't take it right away, as that would lead to a queen trade and a drawish ending. Wei Yi slides the king to protect against a rook discovery. Gukesh now finally takes the bishop with the rook to e3, and now comes a great move, queen to b4. This protects the e1 square from any last rank, bank rank checkmates, and simultaneously attacks the rook on f8. Black plays rook to c8, attacking the pawn on c2. Gukesh calmly plays a rook to c1. It looks passive, but it defends the pawn and locks in a totally winning position. Why? Because of the g6 pawn that completely paralyzes the black king. Now it's time to convert. Rook to e4, queen to a5, king to g8, a prophylactic move, pawn to b3, prevents any future back rank tricks. Rook to e8, and Gukesh captures the pawn on a7. 2 extra pawns for white. Queen to e6, Gukesh centralizes with queen to d4. Black tries one last trick, pawn to f3, aiming for a passed pawn, but Gukesh simply defends the g6 pawn with the rook to g5. Wei Yi offers a queen's exchange, and Gukesh, now up 2 pawns, gladly accepts it. After rook to a5, Black resigns. Anyone rated under 2400 might continue playing here, but for 2700 plus grandmasters, this type of position, down 2 pawns in a rook endgame, is as hopeless as playing without a queen. If you enjoyed this masterclass by world champion Gukesh, please like and subscribe. It really helps support the channel and allows us to bring more high-level games like this directly to you.